Hello and welcome to Talking Tudors, a fortnightly podcast about the ever-fascinating Tudor dynasty. My name is Natalie Grueninger and I'll be your host and guide on this journey through 16th century England. Are you ready to step through the veil of time into the dazzling and dangerous world of the Tudor court? Without further ado, it's time to talk Tudors. Hello everyone, welcome back to Talking Tudors episode 29. I'm your host, Natalie Grueninger. Before we get started, I'd like to thank the wonderful patrons who very generously pledged to support this podcast. A huge thank you to Andy, Joanna, Christina, Sharon, Jenny, Julie and Noelle. Thank you Raluca, Dawn, Daniel, Leslie, Katie, Jenny G, Shah and Beth. Lots of gratitude for Carol, Caroline, Sally, Haynes, Stephanie, Stacey, Callan, Marcus, Lauren and Denise. If you love Talking Tudors and would like to show your appreciation and support the work I do, just click on the Be My Patron on Podbean badge on the homepage of my website www.onthetudortrail.com or click on the Be a Patron button on the Podbean app. Join the Talking Tudors patron family before the end of April and you'll be automatically entered into our patron-only monthly giveaways. This month's prize is a stunning Tudor Book of the Garden donated by the lovely folk at Tudor Times shop. Apart from being a practical garden journal, it's also a treasure trove of information about the Tudor garden and gardener. Further details available at shop.tudortimes.co.uk. Now, on to today's episode. I'm thrilled that joining me on the show to talk about Anne Boleyn's portrait medal and the Tudor choir screen at King's College, Cambridge is Lucy Churchill. Lucy's initial degree in three-dimensional design led to a career in museums and restoration. The design degree enabled Lucy to appreciate how things are made, and the museum work meant that she handled beautiful objects every day, learning what top-quality craftsmanship looks and feels like. From this experience, Lucy concluded that she didn't want to just look and touch beautiful objects, she wanted to create them too. This led to Lucy training in restoration stone carving at the City and Guilds of London Art School, which instilled in her an attention to fine detail and gave her a rigorous grounding in stone carving, stone masonry and letter cutting. Since 2003, she's run her own business, creating sculpture by commission for individual clients and teaching short stone carving workshops in her studio. My conversation with Lucy straight after this short musical break, courtesy of guitarist Jon Sayles. Welcome to Talking Tudors. Lucy, how are you?
Hi, Natalie.
So lovely to have you on the show. Really lovely. Now, you and I know each other. We've been friends for some time. But could you, just for the benefit of our listeners, maybe tell them just a little bit about yourself and your background?
I'm a sculptor, and I come from a stone carving background, but now I work in all sorts of materials. And some of my sculptures are very big that you can climb into, and some are tiny, so you can hold them in your hand or wear them. But I come from a a sort of classically trained fine craft background, and so I've worked in historical restoration, which is what brought me to the Most Happi medal. And before then, I was working in museums, so I come very much from the stable of history and fine craft.
Lovely. And when did your interest in the Tudor period begin?
Well, I've always loved history, all sorts of history, but particularly I had a kind of moment, and since then, it was 12 years ago,
right,
and since then only read Tudor history. It was my daughter was a baby at the time, and she's got a very fast metabolism, so when she needs to feed, she needs it desperately. Right. So she was screaming on the high street, and I just looked around for the nearest place to pull over, and it turned out to be a bookshop cafe. And I was just feeding her, and just sort of, how you get landlocked for however long it takes.
That's right.
And my arm just kind of reached out to try and find something to read while I was just sitting there. And it was a book about Henry VIII and his wives.
That's fantastic.
And I just got drawn into it, and I actually bought the book. Yeah, I only got as far. At first, I was really sucked into Catherine of Aragon and read all about her. And then I just thought, who is Anne Boleyn? She sounds such a cow. I turned my attention to her, just to try and understand who this sort of harpy was. And I just discovered a very complex, moving woman.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. That's a very unique story. I haven't heard one like that before. So, Lucy, I'd like to talk about your absolutely brilliant reconstruction of Anne Boleyn's The Most Happi portrait medal, which Professor David Starkey, by the way, for our listeners, said is the best image we're ever likely to have of Anne Boleyn. The original medal, made in 1534, is the only undisputed contemporary portrait of Anne. All the other portraits of the Queen, that you're probably thinking of out there, date from the Elizabethan period or later, and the two Holbein sketches, which are said to be Anne, apart from kind of appearing to depict two different sitters, have also been the source of much debate over the years. So could you talk to us then about this Tudor medal and why it was commissioned?
Yeah, so I don't know if all the listeners are going to know what it looks like, but it looks like a coin.
Yeah.
And it's small. It's 38 millimeters across, so it's like a contemporary coin, really, a bit larger. And it says around the outside, "The Most Happi, Anno 1534." And so for a long time, it was thought to celebrate her coronation, but obviously that was a year before. So it's kind of like, what was happening in 1534? And that was when she was pregnant with her second pregnancy. And that's the kind of poignant story of it, really, because it depicts her at the height of her success. She was married, she'd proved her fertility with Elizabeth, and had at that point had no reason to doubt that she couldn't give birth to more children.
That's right.
And there was a lot of writing about how excited they were about the coming boy, and there was a very expensive cradle being made. And I think this was part of the kind of excitement and preparation. Maybe it was the equivalent of doing a spread in Vanity Fair. Great celebrities do that now when they're pregnant.
Exactly.
So very much it shows her at her most happiest, although happy in those days actually meant lucky. So she was like the most lucky.
Yeah, that's right. Fantastic. All right. Well, I'd love to hear more about how you actually went about reconstructing this incredible Tudor treasure.
Well, I read about the medal, obviously, in various biographies of Anne. And again and again it was said, it's the only lifetime portrait of her, but unfortunately it's damaged, so we can't use it as a proper guide. So obviously, with my background in restoration, I thought, I've got to have a look at this. And I felt kind of duty bound, really, to do it. And also, of course, total personal interest. It's like, oh my God, this is the one the one thing we have to see what she looked like. So I made an appointment. Anybody can go and have a look at anything in the museums. You just have to apply because it's in storage at the moment. So you have to apply several months in advance. And I prepared very much beforehand by making a line drawing of the medal so that I could see the exact footprint. And then I made multiple copies of this so that when I finally got through the doors and into the inner sanctum and had my white gloves on and all the magnification stuff, so I actually looked at it, I could then annotate these sketches very carefully with measurements and sketches of what it looked like from the side. And it was fantastic because it's actually a beautifully crafted object. And even though it has some very strong damage on the high areas, such as her forehead and her nose and the top of her chest, the lower areas are perfectly preserved and show an incredible amount of detail and fine craftsmanship. And that's interesting because if her costume has been so beautifully rendered, it stands to reason that her features would also have been equally well observed. And Eric Ives said that the medal could only have been made by royal authority. So knowing that Anne was kept such tight control of her image, there's accounts, aren't there, about how conscious and controlling she was about her appearance. I think this is how Anne wanted to be seen.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I'm while you're talking, I'm looking at your reconstruction and just, it's so lovely. Yeah, and I think, as you say, it's probably quite a good likeness of her, I think, considering that it would have been made under royal authority and that Anne would have, probably approved it, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's surprising because we're so used to seeing these iconic images of her that, as you say, were painted 25 years after her death, with a very fine, sort of heart-shaped, pointy chin. And, whereas contemporary accounts didn't say she was a beauty, that it was her character that was so vivacious.
That's right. And Lucy, during your research and the process of reconstructing the medal, you discovered that some of the elements depicted in the portrait medal are also actually shown in portraits of Henry's other queen consorts. Could you tell us about what elements you found in common with these other paintings?
Yeah, it was very exciting because when I held the medal in my hand and saw it under magnification, you could see very, very clearly the weave of the fabric of her headdress and, of course, jewels. And so listeners can get the best idea of it is if they go to the Holbein portrait of Jane Seymour.
Yes, yeah.
They will see the total outfit with the Gayborhood and the necklace and the dress. Now, in the medal, Anne isn't actually wearing that dress, but that's probably because she was pregnant. And, even though it obviously could be expanded, anyway, she's not wearing that one in the medal. But you could see, though, in the Jane Seymour portrait, there was even a matching belt to it. So it was obviously a very costly outfit.
Right.
And you can see the headdress in portraits of Catherine of Aragon.
Wow.
The necklace is in the Nid Hall painting. And Catherine Howard and Catherine Parr are also wearing the necklace with different pendants. And it's of importance because it can help identify paintings that are in dispute. Like there's a painting of Lady Jane Grey, which was recently reattributed because this particular necklace, and it was thought, well, Lady Jane Grey wouldn't have had time to access the jewels and have a portrait painted in. And it was the Queen's outfit. And a lot of people say, "Oh, that can't be Anne Boleyn. She wore a French hood."
Yeah, I was just going to ask you about that. Exactly.
Right. Well, the thing is that, as we said, Anne was very much in control of her appearance and knew how to work a look. And when it mattered, such as in this commemorative medal, as on the day of her execution,
that's right, yeah.
She pulled the trump card, which was, "I am the rightful Queen of England."
That's right.
And the public very much associated the Gayborhood with Catherine of Aragon, and obviously this outfit was the outfit of the Queen of England, and that's why she wore it then.
It's fascinating, isn't it? I love that, if our listeners aren't aware, they did recycle and reuse a lot of the gowns and the jewellery, and they reset it for the next Queen Consort and that sort of thing, which is fascinating because then you can sort of, as you've done, it's a bit of detective work, spotting things that maybe Catherine of Aragon owned and wore that were then passed on to Anne and so on. So it's, I love that. It's so interesting. Now,
imagine how Jane Seymour would have felt wearing that hood. Knowing
exactly, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
That, the hood and the necklace, knowing what had happened to Anne, that must have felt pretty...
Exactly. That would have felt, a little awkward. But so, Lucy, how did it feel to be given access to the original medal in the British Museum? Like, what thoughts were actually going through your mind as you obviously you've said you examined it, very closely under magnification. You knew it was created for Anne when it was still, believed and hoped that she was carrying the sun and air. Like, how did that feel?
You don't need to ask me that question. You know what it would feel like. It would feel amazing.
Oh gosh! Tell me more. Describe in detail.
Well, I think I might have cried a bit.
Oh, I think I would too. I'd be a mess. God.
And it was an incredible, to hold it, and I mean, if just to know the anxiety that comes from any pregnancy, let alone knowing that your life depended on carrying a male heir.
That's right.
I think, to know that Anne could have held it and looked at it in that state. It was, I can't use words to say, but I know that, and every person who loves Anne Boleyn would know exactly how I was feeling.
Yeah, I was thinking about it today, and I mentioned to someone, I can't even remember who I mentioned to now, about the fact that obviously, places are so powerful and they can transport us, like when we're standing at Hampton Court or the Tower or wherever, that can transport us, but things are so powerful too, aren't they? And something like that, where it's a one-off, and we know that had she had, the male, there would have been many more copies made. Like, it's such a poignant piece, I think, that particular piece, and of course, being the only contemporary likeness as well. Like, I think that has a real power to just transport us to a very specific moment in time. It's just, it's mind-boggling, really.
It's small, and you hold it in your hand and you look into it. So it's a very intimate piece.
Exactly. It's so wonderful. It reminds me of a line that in an article I read many, many, many years ago by it was written by Hilary Mantel when she visited a house called Sutton House in Hackney. It's a beautiful Tudor house. If you haven't been, it's definitely worth it. And she was there, and one of the lines in the story was that the power of that place really hit her when she realized it. At the time, it was built in, I think it was early 1530s. And she said a line that's just stayed with me, that at the time the house was built, the pearls were still warm on Anne Boleyn's neck, that sort of thing. And I just think, wow, it's so powerful just, imagining that and being transported to such a specific time. It's just amazing, really. Love it.
Yeah. I can't remember whether we mentioned it about the damage. I just think that maybe the listeners, if they look at it, they might go, what? That's,
Yeah.
So the medal is damaged, some of the historians suggested that it might have been deliberately damaged after her death. But having examined it, I can say with total certainty that it wasn't deliberately damaged, but the squashing of her nose and her forehead and eye is because something heavier, because the original is made from lead. Right. And I think maybe a book or a box or something was just And so that's important to bear in mind when you look at the original, just to understand what's going on with her features.
Wow, now that makes me wonder, is that because somebody's tried to keep it safe, or because they've just kind of gone, yep, shove it in this box and, keep it in storage like so much stuff was?
I know, and I mean, who knows? It might have been done when it was made, or it could have been done in the Victorian times, or pretty much any time in its history. That's the interesting thing about it. It wasn't just around then; it's been around in the back of some for a long time.
Fascinating, absolutely intriguing stuff. Now, Lucy, you've also done quite a lot of research on the iconography of the choir screen at King's College Chapel in Cambridge, which was built between 1533 and 1536. Could you talk to us a little bit about why you feel that this was more than, the usual story is this is a celebration of Henry and Anne's marriage. Could you tell us why you feel that it was maybe something more?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was living in Cambridge at the time, and as any Anne Boleyn fan would, you just want to gravitate to places to do with her.
So true.
Yeah, and I mean, you'd know more about this, but I don't believe she actually saw it.
No, I don't think so. Yeah.
But given how onto it she was about visuals, and I can't imagine that she wouldn't have looked or been shown the work, or Pevsner suggests that the craftspeople came from Northern Europe to do it. So we know that she was very cultured, and she attracted good craftspeople, didn't she?
Absolutely.
And so it's a very important transition stylistically. Looking much more forwards. It's a sophisticated piece, and it's so this big choir screen separating the public from the altar, and it's incredibly ornate. Every inch of it is covered in carving, and so I had looked at it many times, and I'd heard the tour guides saying again and again, there's this one carving that stands out that isn't heraldic or figures and flowers, and everything's kind of like Henry and Anne, happy, whatever. And then there's just where in the doorway where you go through the screen to the altar, just to the right of it, there's a very strange carved face that's screaming in agony and appears to be being pulled up by its hair. And that just is a real outlier. And the tour guides had said again and again, oh, this depicts Anne Boleyn, who was beheaded because she was unfaithful. And obviously that doesn't make sense, because the whole screen was meant to have been made to celebrate their wedding.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, and looking at it as a carver, I could see that it hadn't been carved in later. It was definitely an integral part of the screen.
Right.
And it was actually, to go back to Hilary Mantel again, I read Wolf Hall, and in it, she just mentions in passing that there's tapestry that sways as Cromwell leaves the room, and it depicts Absalom, the traitorous son of King David, who came to a sticky end when he tries to rebel against King David, and then runs away, and he's caught by his long hair and suspended in the tree. And so when I read that, it was just like a penny had dropped, and that's it. Because everyone had assumed, because of the long hair, that it was a woman.
Right.
But no. So and then that was kind of like the key. And then having understood that it depicted the fate of traitors, then other carvings on the screen suddenly kind of revealed themselves, a bit like in Harry Potter, where things open up, you can most imagine. Yeah, and so instead of being to celebrate the marriage, my understanding of it, which has been, it's been published and accepted academically, is that it was actually a warning saying, because at the time when it was made after the marriage and obviously before her death. That's right. And it was just at the point of the act of supremacy.
Yeah, that's right.
Exactly. Well, so the threat of death to traitors was a real thing.
Absolutely.
Because Moore and Fisher were being put to death at that point. And also, the rebellious child, so that could refer to Mary.
Right.
Yeah, so the other thing that's interesting is at the top of the choir screen, it shows it shows King David with a harp, but he's wearing Tudor. The lower half looks Tudor dress. If you look at if you're going to stick with the story of King David, you can see that Henry during this period was moving from using biblical figures to justify his position against the Church of Rome and as him being the head of God's church. So it shows a transition of him using them in support of his argument to actually identifying as King David. And you can see that later on in the Psalter, where he's actually, Henry is depicted enacting scenes from King David's life. And so this is a kind of pivotal turning point, this screen. So there's a lot in it.
There is a lot. There's a lot in it, isn't it? You could stand there for hours and just try and work it out. Now, Lucy, you've compiled an extensive index of imagery, and anyone can go and have a look. It's available on Lucy's website to download as a PDF, and I'll put the link in the show notes, but it's lucychurchill.com, and that gives the exact location and possible meaning or your interpretation of the screen's many motifs. So you can actually print that out, stand in front of the screen and check things out. I'd love to hear more about the motifs that are specifically, you've mentioned there's lots, specifically connected to Anne, in particular the HA cipher.
That's a lovely one, isn't it?
It is.
It appears in two other places. One is in the French Psalter that Anne had.
Ah, yes, yeah.
Yeah, and it also appears at Hampton Court in under the archway. It's a much photographed boss.
That's right. Yeah.
But I believe that is a Victorian edition.
That's right.
Whether it was a reconstruction of what was there before, I don't know. But so listeners, if they want to sort of get a picture of it, that would be quite an easy one to Google and to see what it's like. And Eric Ives does a really nice analysis of this cipher, and he says that the A with the stroke through the apex and the normal horizontal written as a V creates the letters T and M out of the single letter A. And so, because Henry and Anne loved these word plays, didn't they?
They did, absolutely, yeah.
So this is a beautiful example of it. So by doing that, you get the Latin word amat. And so Eric Ives says that the cipher means Henry loves Anne or Anne loves Henry. So that's lovely.
It's very touching, isn't it? And they were so good at, sometimes we can stand there and look at these things and think, okay, what does it mean? It takes us a long time. But obviously the Tudors, especially those at court, they understood symbols and visuals. They were so, multiliterate in that way, weren't they? They could just, they knew what the stories meant and whereas we today maybe have to work a little bit harder to understand them.
Absolutely, and the choir screen is a great example of that. How the contemporary viewers would have totally understood the biblical references or the classical ones too, and it's great fun. It's like a great big Sudoku or something.
That's right, a big puzzle to try and piece together. Fabulous. All right. Now, over the years, Lucy, you've worked on some pretty amazing stone carving projects, including ones at St George's Chapel, Windsor Castle and York Minster. Now, I have to admit that when we met for lunch, actually it was basically a year today. Did you know that, Lucy? We had lunch at York.
Oh.
Yeah, it was like, I think I had looked at a photo just before we chatted and it was yesterday, a year ago, which is quite amazing. But anyway.
That was great day.
Oh, it was fantastic. And we had a lovely lunch in a fantastic pub in York. And I was just completely blown away when you showed me one of your sculptures on the outside of York Minster. And you were very casually like, oh, yeah, that's my work there. And anyway, I was just absolutely blown away. How does it feel to see your work alongside the work of medieval stone carvers?
It feels great.
Oh.
Yeah, it's it feels beautiful to be part of the fabric of the building and part of this ongoing process of restoration and renovation. And to actually, I mean, it's interesting to look at work and see the lichen growing on it, and you realise the passage of time. But the great fun of working with old buildings is that in order to make a fitting reconstruction, you have to look very, very closely at the original, what's left. And so you look at all the carvings in order to assess what the standard size would have been and what the motifs used, and you can even tell the types of chisels that were used, how many chisels, which size, and you can see the rhythm of the tool marks, and that teaches you. It's like having a tutorial from the past, because you can learn how you should go about carving it by looking at the marks that are left on the carving. Yeah, so you feel very close to the carver, I think, after having made a reconstruction.
Wow. And I'm just thinking, 500 years from now, when people, hopefully, York Minster's still there and people are studying it, and like we do now, they're going to have the medieval work, and then, and this was by a 21st century carver.
Yeah,
isn't that amazing?
I wasn't able to show you because it's too high up, but I did carve a portrait of myself and also my cat who had just died. And at the bottom of, you get freedom to do whatever you like. Once you've fulfilled the official functions, you can just do whatever you like. And I thought, I'm going to do a woman, because at the time it was pretty unusual to be a female stone carver.
Wow, that is so cool. Absolutely cool. Now, Lucy, I only just found out that some years ago you took part in one of my all-time favourite shows, Time Team. So what was your role in that particular project?
Well, they bring craftspeople in just in case they don't find enough stuff in the ground. So you're brought in. It's not certain whether you'll appear in the final cut or not.
Right. Okay.
But, they brought me in to show how the carvings that they were looking for would have been made. And so I went with Alex Langland, the presenter, to have a look at the tombs that had come out of the priory and were now in local churches. And then I showed him the rudiments of stone carving, and he carved a star, which was one of the symbols of the De Vere family. And then I carved a boar, which was the crest that appeared on the knights' helmets.
So what was the location, Lucy, again, just for people listening?
It was Earl's Colne Priory in Essex.
Okay.
Yeah. And it was a fantastic experience to be on Time Team, to have all these people. There were about at least 30 people, all with their own skill set, and just hunting for evidence and meaning. And it was the conversations were great around the dinner table.
I can just imagine. It looks like a lot of fun watching, but you never really know how it is in real life. But yeah.
I can tell you it was all totally authentic, because with a lot of television it's smoke and mirrors, but this was, they would have meetings every few hours to say, right, what have we got, where are we going, what can we do? And I mean, definitely with Alex, when he was carving, he totally was carving. It was like that was his work. He learnt it and he did it. There was no faking it, unfortunately.
Wow, that's wonderful. That's awesome. I love it even more now. Now, Lucy, I know you run some stone carving workshops in York. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah, I've been doing them for 12 years. And they're 3 days long, and 3 days is actually enough to pick up the skills that you need to keep. I know, it's amazing, isn't it? It's amazing. But having said that, I've got the teaching down to a pat. I really, it's a very kind of carefully arranged course. But so, I mean, I know this for sure because I get sent photographs by my students saying, "Hey, look what I carved at home," and I send them off with tool lists and things like that. But in terms of the skills are actually very, very simple. It's just refining it and refining it.
Right. Wow. I feel like giving it a go next time I'm near you.
Yeah.
Sounds good. All right. And so if people want to get in touch with you, maybe they want to talk to you about doing a commission, or they want to, of course, purchase your fantastic reconstruction, which I suggest every Anne Boleyn Tudor fan goes out right now and buys one. I love it. It's
available as a pendant now as well.
That's right, of course. And I've got the pendant too. I definitely have the pendant. Where do they go to get more information?
I think lucychurchill.com is the simple go-to, and from there they can find my sculpture in stone site to learn about the classes that I run. But lucychurchill.com.
All right, fabulous. And I'll have that link in the notes as well. And of course it is coming up to the anniversary of not just Anne's coronation but her execution, so it'd be lovely to have the pendant. I always wear it on May 19th. It's like my little thing that I do. I light a candle and I wear your gorgeous pendant as well. It's a lovely thing to do. Now, Lucy, we're up to playing our little game of 10 to go. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Easy peasy, don't worry. Starting very easy. What was the last movie that you saw, if you remember? Maybe it's not that easy.
Yeah, I watched The Little Prince with my daughter. Beautiful
movie. All right, lovely. And how do you find, you're incredibly creative, incredibly talented. How do you find inspiration?
Well, until recently, I've always worked to commission.
Right.
And I've loved that. It's like I feel very privileged that people give me their stories and I turn them into a three-dimensional artwork. So a lot of my work's been commemorative. But I am having a new lease of life, and I'm starting to do... I just thought, wouldn't it be a shame if I died and I hadn't actually told my own story?
Yeah, definitely.
I'm thinking ahead. So I've just started, and the thing is, I've had these ideas that I've wanted to do for years and years and years, and now it's like, hey, why not?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but I haven't got them online yet. I'm keeping it under my belt, and then it's all going to go bleh.
Oh, I can't wait. Make sure you let me know so I can have a look when it's out in the world. What was a favourite childhood movie or book?
I loved A Traveller in Time by
Oh, my goodness, that's one of my all-time favourite books.
Yeah. And I'm actually named after Lucy Boston, the author. Who wrote the Green No stories. She was a friend of mine.
Too.
Dad's. Yeah, so really? I knew her, and I knew the house very, very well. So I've got to say, I don't have to say, but I would definitely say Lucy Boston's Green No.
They're
books.
Fantastic. They're absolutely fantastic. That one and Alison Utley's one are just amazing. Definitely. I like to reread them.
That pulled me into the whole history as a living thing.
Yeah. Absolutely, definitely. So what's something you love about where you live? You've recently moved. You mentioned you lived in Cambridge. Now you live in York. What's something you love about York?
I love everything about York.
I know. What's not to love? Gosh.
I know, exactly. What's not to love about York? There's just not a single time that I go into town that I don't come back with just the biggest smile on my face. It's just, you walk through history, and it's also such a friendly place. Everyone should come to York.
Yeah,
it's so
I loved it. Yeah, I absolutely loved it. And those Snickle ways, you don't get anything like that really in many places. Those Snickle ways are amazing.
And you could see it for years and years and just, go down the Snickle way and go, oh my goodness, I didn't realise there was this ancient house that's open to visit, or this tiny church, or, there's just endless riches to be appreciated.
Absolutely. Now, what was your first paid job?
I worked at the Museum of Childhood in Bethnal Green, which is part of the V&A. And that was my weekend job. And that set me on my path. I don't know if I mentioned earlier on that I initially worked in museum administration.
No, I don't think I knew that.
I just loved being surrounded by... Actually, when I was a kid, from when I was 3, for my 3rd birthday. My first memory, actually, is my 3rd birthday, which was at Christmas. And my mum gave me this doll's house, and it was full of very, very old dolls from my grandmother and great-grandmother.
Wow.
Victorian dolls, and I just played and played and played with it, and I think that's what gave me my love of objects having sort of totemic power almost.
Yeah.
You know, it's only a wooden box and little clay figures, but all the worlds and the stories that came out, and that kind of set me off onto sculpture. And so working at the museum was just heaven for me.
Must have been. Do you still have the dollhouse?
Yeah.
Wow, I'd love to see pictures of it. You're going to have to send me some photos. Sounds beautiful.
Come to walk. I'll show it to you.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. That's a good excuse, isn't it? What are you currently reading, Lucy, or what's one of the books you're reading? You reading anything? It's all right to take a break, you know. It's okay.
Okay. I'm reading a book called 100 Vaginas.
Oh,
it's this fantastic project by an artist who took photographs of women's vaginas. Well, it's called vaginas, but actually, obviously, they're vulvas, but people use the wrong word. Yeah. And she took it as a photographic project, but actually what came about was a lot of stories that were social and political and all sorts of stuff. So
there you go. That's the first time anyone's mentioned that book on Talking Tudors. That's the first for everything, isn't it? All right.
It's a serious and beautiful one, but you can cut this bit if you like.
No, all good. We're allowed to say vagina and vulva. That's fine. That's fine, Lucy. Okay. Moving on in time. All good. What's a favourite holiday destination? Changing the topic a bit. Favourite holiday destination?
I go to Brittany a lot.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Is that because of the history and that sort of thing?
Yeah, well, my parents bought a cottage there when I was 3 again. And so we've just been going again and again and again there. And it's in the middle of absolutely nowhere, very rural, very peaceful. So it's kind of strange because all my holidays were spent there. So even though I've gone to school always in England, my sort of growing up, a lot of my firsts happened in Brittany.
Right.
There were things I know, I used to know how to say in French that I didn't know, farming terms and things that I didn't know how to say it in English.
All right. So what, you're a very skilled and talented lady, but what new skill would you like to learn if you could learn another one?
Well, I'm really working on self-confidence and self-expression.
Yeah, good.
I think it's all part of, because of my work in the stone carving trade, where you had to learn to carve in medieval style or Victorian medieval style or classical or whatever. It's all about suppressing who you are so that you can make something creative and beautiful that fits anonymously within the whole body of the building. And people don't say, oh, Dave made that and Lucy made it.
Okay.
So for 25 years, I've just been sort of muting myself out in order to be able to speak the language of the time that I'm creating or tell the story of the person whose memorial I'm making.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. Somebody said, my old boss said, it takes as long to unlearn the skills almost as to learn them. And so I'm trying to sort of, and I'm getting closer and closer to just find my own language.
Right. Well, I'm even more excited now to see the new work that you've got in the pipeline. I can't wait to see that. Now, Lucy, if you could swap places with a person, they can be living or they can be dead, for a day, who would it be?
Cool. Well, I wouldn't mind swapping places with Anne Boleyn on a good day.
On a good day. Maybe not on May 19th, 1536.
No. Yeah, that would be fascinating. I would definitely come back and tell you about that.
I know. I'd like with someone else we were saying we'd like to swap on the coronation day so we can see what the reaction was, because some reports are like, oh, no one cheered, no one took their hats off or whatever. So we'd know for sure. That would be really exciting.
Yeah.
And lucky last, what would you like to see more of in our world today?
Acceptance
Yeah.
of differences.
No, we need that, don't we? Absolutely. Totally agree with you on that one.
I love the work you're doing with Repulsive Love. You're leading with such an incredible example. And if everybody did something like that, imagine what the world would be like.
Oh, thank you. That's lovely. For everyone listening, that's just a little not-for-profit that I have here in Sydney. So thank you, Lucy. That's really kind of you to say. Now, the last thing, sorry, I said lucky last, but I was fibbing a bit, because we've still got our Tudor takeaway, which is a little something for us to check out after the episode. Do you have a Tudor takeaway for us, Lucy?
Well, can I have two?
Of course. I love when my guests say that. Can I have two? Yes, you can. Okay. Definitely.
Well, I was given by my friend Rebecca a beautiful CD of music, which is Anne Boleyn's songbook, which was, have you come across it? It's beautiful.
Yes, it's beautiful. I love it.
Yeah, with a collection of her favourite music based on the songbook that she had. And it also has a version of the song that she was supposed to have composed in the Tower of London and put to music. So that's beautiful. But I would love to urge listeners to have a look at the choir screen, download my PDF of the index of imagery, because there is still so much to be discovered about the screen. I think I've only scraped the surface of its meaning, and for all researchers, it's low hanging fruit. I've made it easy. Yeah. And there's still so many, especially, do you remember when we met there, when we looked around the back and on the provost's stall there's a picture of possibly George and the Dragon, but there's weird imagery, and we know that these Tudors did nothing was incidental.
No, that's right.
Deep with meaning, and it's just waiting to be analysed. So I do think the choir screen has not had the scrutiny that it deserves.
Absolutely. It's just a story waiting to be unravelled, I think. And yeah, it was so wonderful getting you to show me things, because I wouldn't have known what I was looking at. But on that particular trip, that was quite some years ago now, my children were still young, so I wasn't able to spend enough time. So there's another reason why I need to return to England, Lucy, so that we can go to check out the choir screen in peace with no rush, and just enjoy it. Oh, I can't wait for that. That's going to be great. Well, thank you so much, Lucy. It's been such a pleasure chatting with you about your brilliant work. And again, I encourage everyone to check out your website, which has some really just wonderful resources there and some really great things that you can purchase for yourself as well, which is great. So thank you so much for making time to talk Tudors with me.
My pleasure. Anytime.
Well, that brings us to the end of this episode of Talking Tudors. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any comments or suggestions, or just want to say hi, please get in touch with me via my website www.onthetudortrail.com, where you will also find show notes for today's episode. If you've enjoyed the show, please share the podcast with friends and family and click on the all-important follow button so you'll never miss an episode. I also invite you to join our Talking Tudors podcast group on Facebook, where you can interact with other Tudor history lovers and hear all the behind-the-scenes news. It's time now for us to re-enter the modern world. As always, I look forward to talking Tudors with you again very soon.